Hey, welcome back to the Pretty Podcast. I'm Lisa Smith, and I'm so excited. Today, we're talking with Martha Carlin. Martha is a pioneer in microbiome research. After her husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2002, she taught herself chemistry, physics, microbiology, and genetics. She did that in order to understand how the microbiome works and how whole body wellness is tied to a healthy gut. Martha founded the BioCollective, which is a microbiome research company, and BioQuest, which is a probiotic brand designed to restore gut health, and it has some very specific applications. She's also received a $1.2 million grant from the NIH for her microbiome research. She was named Colorado Titan 100 CEO in 2020. She was also a speaker at the White House in 2016 on the Microbiome Initiative launch. She has a TED Talk at TEDx Boulder for advocating a more holistic, systems-based approach to medicine. Welcome, Martha. I am so happy you're here.
Thank you so much for having me today, Lisa.
Martha, you have a fascinating story. You came out of a successful career in the corporate world and then became what you refer to as a citizen scientist, which I absolutely love. Taught yourself hard science because of your story. Can you share that story with us and what brought you on the journey you've been on?
Sure. So, my original background, my college training is in accounting. Accounting is a system that has to balance. And so it teaches you about balancing the equation and the balance sheet, which tells you the history of what's been going on. And I was trained as an auditor when I came out of school, and they train you never take anything at face value, examine the evidence for yourself. And so I had this mindset of always questioning things. And in 2002, my 44-year-old husband had a long history of being an athlete. He was a marathon runner, ran cross country in high school, speed skater, and he looked perfectly healthy, but he was diagnosed with Parkinson's.
Wow.
And it just didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, how does a young person get an old person's disease?
Right.
And the doctor gives you this, drops this bomb on you, and there's no cure. It's a steady downhill slope. Here's a pill. And I just didn't want to take that at face value. So I started looking at things, and I was very fortunate that about a week after he was diagnosed, I went to a yoga retreat in Costa Rica, and they were talking about food. And one of the people there talked about Dr. Weston A. Price, the dentist who had looked at nutrition and neurodegeneration or degeneration from the Western diet and our loss of nutrient dense food. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think that food could be part of the problem. And I came back and looked at our pantry and our freezer, and my husband had been drinking a soy protein shake that he got from a multi-level marketing one of our neighbors once or twice a day for probably 2 years. And then he was a big cereal eater. He was using soy milk, so he was just really loaded up with soy. So I went deep down the food rabbit hole and learned, oh, wow, all these chemicals are being used on our food, and the chemicals were used in warfare, and they're neurotoxins. And so I changed a lot of our diet very early on in the process. And just by doing that, his tremor subsided to where you really couldn't see it. And he was much more stable. And so that was my first foray down the path of understanding, okay, what we put in here, just like in a business or accounting, it's the ledger, it has got to be balanced.
Mm.
And that led me down 10 or 12 years of looking at the food supply and all of those pieces of the puzzle. And then in 2014, I read Dr. Martin Blazer's book, Missing Microbes. And that was talking about growing up in the age of antibiotics and how that sort of overlaid with the rise in chronic disease. And I had never heard of this term microbiome. And that's the trillions of bacteria, fungi, and viruses that live in and on our body. But we're more microbial than we are human.
Mhm.
started to understand that. And I also knew my husband had a long history of taking antibiotics, and other people with Parkinson's I had interviewed over the years also had a history with strep infections or taking antibiotics for acne in their teens. That really decimates the gut microbiome. And later that year, the first paper was published where they showed they could actually separate out there's two primary phenotypes of Parkinson's. One most people are familiar with is the tremor dominance. The other is a posture and gait where they're more tilted like a penguin and their feet freeze. And they could divide them by the gut bacteria. And I was like,
Oh my.
Eureka, that is it. I'm going to go solve this problem. And so I started funding some research at the University of Chicago and went on to found the BioCollective with one of the scientists there and another scientist I was introduced to, Dr. Suzanne Vernon.
Amazing. So tell us a bit about John. You and I were talking off camera first.
Sure. First, we sent about 75 samples to the University of Chicago and they did whole genome sequencing. They sequenced every gene in there. And that was not done that often back then. That will give you fungi, viruses, bacteria, and you'll get all the gene function information. I was getting giant spreadsheets of all these names of microorganisms, and I'm like, I don't know anything. And I just was going into PubMed and pulling up science papers and printing them out and reading about all these different organisms. One of the earliest things I did was I took the spreadsheet with the different bacteria and I looked at some of the pathogenic organisms and I said, if you had an acute infection with this one, what would your symptoms be? That was 2015. I said, I think Parkinson's is a chronic low grade infection of these different bacteria. And people with Parkinson's present with different symptom profiles. It's, my husband used to call it the designer disease because this person might have these five symptoms and this person has two of those five, but three others.
Interesting.
And you could actually see different things in the gut bacteria that could produce certain types of symptoms. That was my first idea about Parkinson's, which has gone on to layer in how there's some autoimmune aspects to Parkinson's. And then I later layered on something called molecular mimicry, which is bacteria can make a protein very similar to a human protein. So the immune system attacks the bacterial protein and gets rid of that. It's still looking for something with a similar template so it can attack our own tissues. Then in 2016, we were under quite a bit of stress. We had moved, our youngest son left to go to college. There was a lot of change. We went to the World Parkinson's Congress, and a couple of women there sat down next to my husband and started talking about their husbands who had died and how awful it was. And it set in motion this fear and picture in his mind. And he was already having a little trouble. He was walking with a cane. But at that same conference, I saw a citizen scientist group called Clinic Crowd. And they were presenting the data of a scientist from Israel who had shown that the sugar alcohol mannitol could stop the aggregation of the proteins in a mouse model and actually pull them out of the brain and clear them. And they were trying to get people to just take oral mannitol. So I came back and bought a mannitol chemistry book and started reading about it. The first chapter in the book was about specific bacteria that can ferment mannitol from glucose and fructose. And one of those bacteria is called Lactobacillus reuteri, which
Mhm.
has become very popular now through the work of Dr. William Davis and his work around SIBO. And it's a microbe that many of us have lost. It's very sensitive to antibiotics. And so I came up with this idea of what if we could put a team of probiotic organisms like the reuteri and some others back together in the gut to make a little factory so that you would have a factory to do this again like we used to be able to do. And so we made that for John in late 2016 and he started taking it about Christmas time. And within 30 days, he was no longer walking with a cane. And we were testing his microbiome, and it was moving back closer to the healthy human microbiome profile. And his Parkinson's, what's called a UPDR score, went from a 35 to a 20. So the higher it is, the more advanced your Parkinson's. And so it dropped down to a 20 and it stayed at a 20 for 4 years. So he was very stable from 2017 to 2021. And then in late 2021, he had a very severe case of COVID. And then from 2021 through 2024, we worked a lot on trying to repair the damage from COVID. We had some success, but not full success. And in 2020, he had a pulmonary embolism, likely from the damage to the microvasculature from the long COVID.
I'm so sorry. You've been on quite a journey.
It has been quite a journey. And John was very much tracking his observations and telling me about things that I was able to translate. Here's a great example. If he would freeze, and I would say, "What does it feel like?" And he would say, "It feels like when I was a runner and I had lactic acid buildup. It feels like lactic acid in my whole body." And so then I started looking at lactic acidosis, and not only from our cells, but also from the gut bacteria. And that led me to looking at endurance athletics because John was an endurance athlete, and endurance athletics puts a lot of strain on the body. Many athletes don't really realize, but what happens when you're like doing a long-term run or some endurance event is the blood supply pulls away from the gut and goes out to the muscle tissue. And that's where it needs to be. When you stop the event, the blood goes rushing back into the gut and it can cause reperfusion injury. And
Oh
so
my
that's
goodness.
actually a leaky gut phenomenon
Yeah.
that then there's quite frequently LPS endotoxin that goes across the barrier. And that's why they will often have a day or two after a major event where they really don't feel well. So I started looking at that and what was going on with endurance athletics. Also, you have very dramatic swings in electrolyte balance as you're going through these long-term events. And that was another piece of the puzzle with John was after COVID, the electrolyte instability or narrow bandwidth of homeostasis, it gets difficult to manage. Trying to put those pieces together with what's going on in the gut and what's going on with your food. And I do think some of that damage early on from endurance athletics, and also they carb load a lot to do
Mm,
that as well.
so interesting. So, to take us back a little bit, the first formula you created was a formula that would combine together so that the body would produce more mannitol on its own.
Yes. We originally just made it for John and then we were letting other people try it and they were like, "Oh, this has been great for my constipation or have better energy or I'm sleeping better." And I was like, "How can it be doing all these different things?" Over time, as we began to understand a lot of the different mechanisms of what's going on in energy production in the body and what the gut bacteria are doing for us in terms of making our B vitamins, really running that energy cycle
Mm.
and digesting our food, making minerals bioavailable. There's all of these pieces of the puzzle that this bacterial team in our body does. And when we've lost the diversity and the capability of some of what's going on in our gut, if you're putting back a team that can support the restoration of the whole ecosystem is really how that played out. Because when we did a clinical trial in diabetes, and what we showed was it was actually restoring the overall ecosystem. So some of the keystone species, Roseburia and Fecali bacteria, those are technical names. People don't really need to know them. But those are keystone species that often get lost and they're very important. And those came back. And then bifidobacteria, which many of us have lost, which is very important to brain health and just overall immune training. A lot of us have lost that too because we weren't breastfed. That's really when we get colonized with the bifidobacteria from our mother's breast milk that exclusively feeds bifidobacteria. So what we saw was these keystone species coming back and the gut returning to what it should be, which is an anaerobic state.
Mm.
And then in that process, kicking out all the bad guys that are producing those LPS endotoxins.
As you're finding that these keystone species are just not there anymore, probably in a pretty significant number of us of our population, what are some of the ways that we're losing those? You mentioned antibiotics.
These household cleaning products, toothpaste, the what are called quaternary ammonium compounds or surfactants. My husband was an avid hand sanitizer. Alcohol hand sanitizer is much safer than a lot of the gel sanitizers that have these other quaternary compounds in them. And he was using those a lot. I didn't know anything about that until after John had passed away. And it was like, oh my gosh, of course, he was an obsessive cleaner. And that's knocking down your whole ecosystem across the board. But the other things are just the Western diet. So the lack of complex carbohydrate fibers. You're eating a lot of simple carbohydrates that feeds the more pathogenic profile. Glyphosate, also, a lot of people don't know what that is, but it is the most widely used herbicide on our food. It's now found across the board in most food. You can't avoid it.
Right.
And that's also one of the things in our sugar shift formula is we designed for finding specific species of bacteria, lactobacillus, that were resistant to glyphosate because most of them are killed by glyphosate. So we have bacteria that are resistant to glyphosate and can also break it down and break it down as a team to help the body eliminate that. And I think that also helps restore the gut. But there's so many chemicals in our food designed to kill insects or kill whatever on the plants, but the microbial life in us is we're actually not that different. And
Mm.
so when you look at the components of all of those things, this microbial part of ourselves is under attack.
Such a great point. Glyphosate triggered my thinking when you had said what John had been doing 2 years before his diagnosis. That was a lot of those soy drinks and a lot of cereals. And those since 1994 have been overloaded with glyphosate, which for every that's Roundup. That's the active ingredient in Roundup. And it's everywhere, but especially in soy products, wheat products, oat products, cereals, grains. So when you said that, I thought, I wonder if glyphosate played a role early on because it would totally dismantle the microbiome, as you said, the good guys.
It is, and it is patented as an antibiotic. So that
Yeah.
was actually one of the deep rabbit holes I went down back then. And I found it still wasn't till many years later, but I found Stephanie Seneff, who's done a lot of the pioneering work on that and has a book called Toxic Legacy about glyphosate. And then I found epidemiology paper overlaying the incidence of about 20 different chronic diseases, the rise in GMO corn and soy and glyphosate. And it's really alarming. So that
Mm.
all along has been a big focus for me is understanding all the different mechanisms in the way that disrupts our gut because also people don't realize so there are three amino acids tyrosine, tryptophan, and phenylalanine. Those are the aromatic amino acids. We don't make those. So we have to get them from our food or
Hmm.
from the bacteria in our gut. So the bacteria in our gut do make them, but they are made in this pathway that is actually the target of glyphosate. So it's disrupting that. And those are very important amino acids for our mental health. So
Yeah.
a lot of those neurotransmitters require those aromatic amino acids.
Oh my gosh. You and I could go on a deep dive on this. The majority of serotonin is made in our gut. And we're seeing such an epidemic of low dopamine. In general, people are craving dopamine hits. And there are multiple reasons for that, but we can see how glyphosate has played such a significant role in that. And then you did mention something really surprising. I just saw a recent study showing how problematic hand sanitizers are. And I didn't put that together at all until you just mentioned that. Surfactants that we would get on our skin would for our microbiome health.
We absorb things through our skin. It's a major organ. And when you have it on your hand and then you're eating food, it's coming into your mouth. There's some recent research raising issues about the rise in the use of sanitizers from COVID, with some blood data actually showing how much, I want to say it's 2 or 3 times more in the blood now than it was pre-COVID. And so raising the concerns about that. And I actually had a really interesting conversation with a young onset Parkinson's physician. He was an orthopedic surgeon in his 40s and had to give up his practice, but he was diagnosed with Parkinson's 1 year into COVID. And I was asking him about different exposures, and I started talking about the quaternary ammonium compounds and surfactants. And he said, "Oh, that's really interesting. During COVID, they changed how they were cleaning his operating room, and these people would come in total hazmat clothes with these sprayers and spray every surface but after every surgery or before every surgery. And the compound was actually called quat.
Oh, oh my.
And so he was being exposed to that throughout the day, all day long, every day. And then, of course, he was also exposed to anesthesia. Because if I didn't think about this, but somebody who's a mouth breather, they put the anesthesia mask on their face, but when they're mouth breathing out, they're expelling the anesthesia. And so there's always a little bit of it in the air
I
when you
never would have
have.
thought of that. Oh, that's fascinating. Based on all your research, and you're a lifelong learner, you're always researching and learning more for us, but based on what you've learned, what do you think we're getting wrong about the microbiome? What are the things that are most surprising that if people knew, they'd be like, oh my gosh, that first of all, it's amazing, but second of all, that's something I could easily change.
That's the biggie there is like people get focused on their genetics and they're like, oh, I've got this gene or that gene. In terms of genes, there are anywhere between 100 to 300 times more genes from the microbes in us than our own genetic material.
It's,
To me, says that's our primary system of genetic information. It's like a primary operating system. So if we're not thinking about our microbial selves and taking care of that part of ourselves, we're missing out on the best opportunity we have to make change and have a different outcome. There's lots of evidence showing you can change your diet and your lifestyle, and within a day or a week or a month, you can have tremendous difference in your microbiome. And we showed that just with John with the probiotic over 120 days. It was still remodeling and improving over that 120-day period. So when you start to focus on how to take care of your microbiome,
mm,
you can have a profound difference in your health outcomes. Because if you go look into the scientific literature over the last 15 years, really, there isn't a disease that doesn't have some profound connection to the microbiome.
yeah, we do hear that all the time. Your health begins in the gut, and it's crucial to heal your gut. But just like you said about genetics, I feel like we don't always get the point. Like we get the around the point, but we don't actually get the point. So when it's the genetics, I'm predisposed, like I have this genetic SNP or this genetic makeup, and I can weight more easily, or I'm more prone to X, Y, and Z. And I feel like we're chasing the wrong rabbit trail. And even in gut healing, sometimes I feel like we're chasing the wrong rabbit trail because people are told just go out and get a probiotic. It doesn't matter what kind. Let's talk about how likely is it someone's going to go pick up a probiotic, even if it's refrigerated, good brand at the health food store, and see it have an impact.
That's actually one of the areas that I've done quite a bit of education on in the last several years. When you go to a store and you look, people get cross-eyed because there's so much, quote, choice on the shelf of all these probiotics. But the truth of the matter is, most of the probiotics on the shelf when you go to the store are coming from just 3 suppliers, and they're only about 12 strains. And so there's very little diversity. So you have to really look for microbial diversity and the specifics of what problem are you trying to solve. Is it vaginal health? Then maybe you want to look at a strain called Lactobacillus crispatus. That's one that Dr. Davis has focused a lot on and shown some good evidence around that. Are you dealing with blood sugar? Our sugar shift formula is designed as a team, like an ecosystem, to help the whole system flourish, to help you address blood sugar regulation and overall gut health. But we've designed teams for sleep that support the production of tryptophan and bacterial melatonin. We have a new product for anxiety, for stress, that helps as a team. It's helping to produce GABA, those calming neurotransmitters, and settling the system down. And the sleep product, you can see that if you have an Oura ring, you'll see that in the first night or the first week. You'll be able to tell if it's right for you. And just a general probiotic on the shelf is probably not going to solve what you're looking for. Another example is people who take antibiotics and they're like, oh, go get a probiotic after you take antibiotics. There is some evidence that some probiotics after you've had antibiotics can actually make it harder for you to recover. And we did some research on that showing that some of these formulas make the whole system too acidic. There's no balance in the system. And so we actually designed a formula to work as a team to go back in and balance the pH so that you can restore a broader population in the gut after antibiotics. And we're actually just getting ready to start a clinical trial on that product. The soil-based organisms are also interesting. We used to get exposed to Bacillus subtilis or Bacillus coagulans, or what are known as spore-forming bacteria. When they're in a spore form, they're not, quote, live in terms of replicating, but they're still signaling in the body. And that's another myth of the probiotics industry, is you hear people, oh, if it doesn't survive the gut, it's not doing anything. That's actually not true either, because bacteria, they have action in a live form, in a damaged form, and even their cell wall components are immunomodulators. So all throughout that process, they've got some action in your body and your immune system. So when they're live, they are bioactive and they are breaking things down and producing what are called postbiotics. If they're damaged, they can still do that. They just might not be quite as active. And then if they're dead, that cell wall component can have a lot of the probiotics have immune modulation benefits. The bad bacteria, those cell wall components, are endotoxin or LPS. That's a dead cell wall of bacteria that is inflaming your system.
So what if you go to the store, buy a bottle of probiotics that are refrigerated, right? So you're thinking you have a good percentage of them are live. But what if they're mostly dead, but they're probiotics? They're not pathogenic. They're not the LPS that produce the endotoxin. So do those cell walls of good probiotics, do they have a benefit?
They do. It depends on the strain, what that benefit is. But I happen to have a good friend of mine, a Russian scientist who came to the States about 15 years ago. She has a probiotic company called Stellar Biotics, and her Delamune product is actually enzymatically lysed. And by that, I mean the bacteria have been actually broken up and killed and their contents spilled out. So you have the cell wall components and then all of their postbiotics that they were making. And that particular, it's a Lactobacillus rhamnosus strain, and it has been studied for the cell wall components, which are called myramyl dipeptides, and how those educate and initiate immune response to be helpful in things like cancer, or if you're going to be exposed to something like COVID or whatever. Yes, probiotic bacteria, the dead cell walls, are what are these little bioactive peptides. And there's a whole industry about peptides. Bacteria are great peptide factories.
Interesting. So it goes back to your example of when you made that formula to have the body become a mannitol producing
Yeah,
factor.
make a factory and you have the end to end, you have the probiotic, the postbiotic, and then the dead cell walls, those can be called postbiotic too, but there's still some arguing over terminology. But I just like to tell people bacteria have lots of action, dead and alive.
I did not know that. That is so cool. So, if for someone say they just got off a course of antibiotics, there's a lot going around right now.
Yeah.
Just so say someone gets off a course of antibiotics and they think, normally I go to the store and just buy probiotics. What should they do? Because you just mentioned that's actually counterproductive in some cases.
It can be in some cases. And that is why we made something specific for recovery after antibiotics. I would recommend taking our antibiotic antidote. Another thing somebody could do is I do also recommend fermented foods. If you're not sensitive, some people who have gut issues that they haven't dealt with
Yeah.
might be too sensitive to fermented foods. But if you're not sensitive to fermented foods, and if you're not sensitive to dairy, adding in a kefir, but you can do water kefir if you're sensitive to dairy. I also have a lot of people who make coconut milk yogurts with all of my products, but Sugar Shift is the main one. There's a yogurt machine called Luvele.
Yeah.
It's Luvele. And they have YouTube videos of making the coconut milk yogurt with our Sugar Shift probiotic. And I actually have a gentleman in Greece who studied like 600 people. He made yogurt from our Sugar Shift coconut milk yogurt, and all the different things people were coming to him to get help for. He gave them the yogurt. And he said it helped with every single thing. So I need to do a deeper dive on the science of how he makes the yogurt. He makes it with a very specific yogurt machine that ferments for 48 hours. He uses a very specific coconut milk because he tried all these different ones. And what I'd really like to know is what are all those bioactive compounds in there? For restoring your gut, fermented foods is a great way to do that with variety because a fermented food is an ecosystem. It's a group of microbes that are working together to keep pathogens out of the fermentation.
Yeah, I've tried coconut cult, but it's a coconut milk yogurt, which is delicious. And they tell you just to take a spoonful or two a day. It's cost prohibitive. It's so expensive. It's 10 bucks for a little. So I keep saying I'm going to make it, but if you figure out some more details, please pass it along. We'll put it in the show notes because I'm going to start making it.
I will send that to you. I like his because he says he doesn't have to add anything else to it. Because I've played with the coconut milk yogurt a few times with different ones and different people's recipes, and they add thickeners and different things. And his is you don't add anything except you do the coconut milk, you do one capsule of Sugar Shift, you ferment it 48 hours, and then you chill it for 48 hours. And he said it comes out like creme brulee.
Oh, okay.
I've got to get his whole thing written down. And his yogurt machine is from Sweden or Switzerland because most of them don't have a 48-hour fermentation.
Oh,
And you have to go for the full 48 hours without interruption. You could probably do that with a sous vide. I don't know if you could do it with the Instapot or not because I don't think it would go 48
a
hours.
long
The Lou Valley goes 36 hours, and that's how I usually make mine is 36 hours.
getting close then.
Yeah.
I did want to talk about when people are taking probiotics, there are a couple schools of thought. So, what are we not getting right about probiotics? Like some people say, I have to take them all the time. Some people say, I take them, I reestablish the ecosystem, then I feed them with the prebiotics, the food for the probiotics, so different kinds of vegetables and fruits. But do people need to take them ongoing? Say the Sugar Shift, they decide they want to reestablish their ecosystem. Tell us what to do.
So I'll say yes and no. I just had a conversation with my yoga instructor last week because a few months ago I gave her a bottle of the Sugar Shift because she said, "Oh, I have terrible sugar cravings." And so I was telling somebody in yoga class, I took it for 1 month and like my sugar cravings are gone. And so she's not taking it anymore.
Ah,
It's outside of her budget, but she got some benefit from it and she was very excited. But what I do see, and If you are constantly being exposed to glyphosate, like a lot of us, then it's probably a good idea to have it in your regular rotation, maybe not every day. But then I have people with chronic constipation who have to take it every day.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
and when they don't take it, I had one gentleman with Parkinson's who was taking it and he forgot to order it, ran out, was traveling, and he called me in a desperate panic. Okay, I forgot to order. I'm out of it. I'm backed up. Can you overnight this to me at this location? And then we have a product called Ideal Immunity that's it has a strain of bacteria that's very effective at knocking out foodborne pathogens. And
Oh,
I have a doctor in Hawaii who, in the 1970s, got something from one of his patients where he had chronic diarrhea for, let's see, 30, 50 years.
oh my.
And he had tried everything and he was on anti-diarrheal medication multiple times a day. And his daughter sent him the Ideal Immunity. And he's like, okay, I've tried every probiotic. He wrote me and he said, it's like a miracle because I don't have this diarrhea anymore. I'm able to be normal. But when he stops taking it, whatever is there returns. So
I
I
see.
think it really depends on the person. Because if you've got something in your ecosystem that needs a wolf to keep it in check,
Yeah.
then maybe you need to keep the wolf around. But everybody's not going to be like that. There are people who can take it, it solves their problem, or take the antibiotic antidote for a month or two after antibiotics. Your
Yeah.
gut's restored, you feel great, then great, move on from it. But there's just so much toxic burden that we have nowadays. And those bacteria are really our friends in terms of helping us deal with that toxic burden, and especially the soil-based organisms. So we have a Bacillus subtilis that's in every one of our formulas, and those soil-based organisms are also great detoxifiers. They can help pull out heavy metals and do things like that. In the environment we're in today, it's a great tool to have, but you can solve a problem and move on, or you can rotate. Certainly, adding in just a teaspoon or a tablespoon of sauerkraut or kimchi with your meal once a day is a great way to keep your gut health in place.
Great point. So you could actually do a month of one of your formulations, then you could do a couple months of being really mindful of getting probiotic foods in, and then you could switch back on and just keep it every couple few months, just re-inoculate, basically.
Right.
Before we wrap up, how many formulas do you have?
We have a heart formula for cardiovascular health that supports CoQ10 and nitric oxide synthesis. We have the Ideal Immunity, that one I was just talking about. And I took that, I just came back from a trip to Mexico and I took extra with me and gave it to everybody, and nobody got sick. The Sugar Shift is our core product for metabolic health. We have the sleep product that's called Simple Slumber, and we have Perfect Peace, which is our anxiety and stress, and then we have the antibiotic antidote. So there's 6 formulas, and then we have actually a jar for yogurt starter if you don't want to open capsules. It's just a jar with a scoop because we have a yogurt cult that follows us. And so we started making the yogurt scoop, and Louvelli also sells that with their yogurt makers.
Oh, that's so neat. We'll have all of this in the show notes. If someone were going to start, Martha, would they start with Sugar Shift? Would they start with the immunity? I know it depends on what they have going on.
It really depends on what you have going on. If you're really trying to do a gut reset, we do have a package called the Total Gut Reset, and that starts with antibiotic antidote. And sometimes people will go, I haven't had any antibiotics for a long time. Actually, you have, because antibiotics are all over the food supply.
Yeah.
So that starts with a month of antibiotic antidote, then it moves to Ideal Immunity, which is targeting a lot of those foodborne pathogens, and then it moves you to Sugar Shift for that overall metabolic health.
We didn't even get to talk about BioCollective, which I wanted to do. We'll do that at another time. This is amazing. How do people find you?
So I write a blog on our BiotiQuest, which is BiotiQuest.com. BiotiQuest.com, that's where our products are. And I write a lot about gut health and fermented foods on the BioCollective blog. I also have a Parkinson's blog that I write called marthasquest.com. And
Mm.
I have a Substack that confusingly is also called Martha's Quest, but it's on Substack. And that's a little bit broader environmental topics and some Parkinson's as well. So those are the three best places to find me.
Okay.
We also have a YouTube channel, and that's at BioCollective, and same thing on Instagram. We post replays of interviews like this, and then every second and fourth Tuesday of the month, we have what's called the BioCollective Community Learning Lab, and I will bring in other speakers to teach people about not just gut health, but lots of different oral microbiome health, different sort of topics about food and general health. And then I will answer questions some of those weeks. And so those are also available on the YouTube channel. People can always reach out to me through the website or through any of those websites, and I'm happy to answer questions. And especially for people with Parkinson's, I'm happy to set up a phone call and answer questions for people because it can just be such a heavy diagnosis. And I want people to know that there is hope for an exciting and adventurous life beyond the diagnosis.
Oh, it's so important to have that hope and to know that there are other solutions than just take this pill and go home and that's it. So
Yeah.
I so appreciate the passion you have and how you've devoted your life to this, to helping people get well and stay well and having hope.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Martha. Guys, thanks for joining us. I'll be back next week. Until next week, stay pretty well. Bye.